consistency is like the being consistent in your learning gets you off the hook for when you screw up. You know what I mean? Because at least like 95% of the time you're doing your best. The truth about what you've gone through so that you can learn from it, so that others can learn from it. And I promise everybody, whether it's a business or whether it's a personal story, there is somebody out there waiting to hear yours. Like that's the truth. Imagine a world that has debilitated any opportunity for trust. Like there's no connection between human beings. And then two people forced into a situation in which trust can arise again. What does that look like?
Welcome. We have with us today Miguel Eichelberger, and I'm really grateful for him being here. He is a communication consultant, and really, I got a chance to meet him through a friend of mine. And what grabbed my attention is his authenticity, which is so valuable in today's world for us to show up. Miguel, welcome, my dear.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm grateful that you're here. And honestly, I know we've had a few conversations. What I would love for people to know before we go into the communications and all of that wonderful stuff is to get to know you a little bit. Because it's always wonderful to know the human being that is giving advice, that's giving input, that knows how to train. Who is that human being and why they got there? So would you take me through a little bit about your background? Even you can go back to childhood.
Absolutely. So first, like I believe in authenticity. I believe in staying and doing what one actually believes. What that takes is a lot of work to find out what that actually is. Like, what do I actually believe? What do I care about? And so my background to get to this point, I am a son of immigrants. I grew up in northern British Columbia on a farm in basically as north as you can go, where it gets real cold for most of the year. And yeah, I had parents who were adventurers who had traveled the world before they settled down up north, and who, like, my father was a soldier and a former soldier, and he was a mechanical engineer and inventor, consummate scientist. And my mother came from a law school background, and then like worked in travel. Both of them had multiple languages, and what that sort of resulted in was a very different kind of upbringing for me. I was very different from the rest of my friends and the people that I grew up with around. And I really leaned into that. Like, being different, seeing that difference was very interesting to me. I had a perspective that included a lot more of the world, even though I hadn't yet even visited said world. And what it always came back to is those stories of like my parents' travels and the stories of my siblings and all of that. The way that those were communicated and communicated well was always through the very best use of language. And I remember I was 13 years old, and I was still in like finishing elementary school in grade 7, and I'd written a story, and the teacher said a couple of nice things about that story, and I realized right there, I was like, that's what I want to do. I'm going to be a writer. No matter what it is I do, when I move through life, I'm going to be a writer. And through writing, that's how I got to authenticity.
I'm curious, how many languages did your parents speak?
Ooh. So my mom is fluent in, I can't remember if it's 6 or 7 languages. Like, she can hold conversations in 6 or 7 languages. And my father was, he could understand so many languages, but he could speak, I think it was like 5 or 6 as well. And fascinating languages too. Like, my favorite one is when he first moved to South Africa. He was a mining engineer and worked for one of those companies. And as part of their first sort of like, you're hired, you're going to come in here. Oh, thumbs up. You're going to come in here and you're going to work with all of these different people from this tribe and from this tribe and from this tribe. And so everybody speaks different languages. And so you get this crash course in the first 2 and 3 weeks in a language called Fanakalo, which is the language of the mines that everybody speaks. And so that's one of the weirder languages they speak.
I'm also curious, why did you feel that you were different in your childhood?
So I grew up around a lot of agriculture, a lot of farmers. And what I noticed first and foremost, whenever I went to go hang out with my friends and stuff like that, is there was just a lot more books and a lot more sort of science texts and science and opportunities for experimentation in my home than there were in other homes. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. The fact that both my parents had two very thick accents that were different than even each other. Even the way I speak, I have certain inflections now because of their accents that like nobody else spoke like. And yeah, it was just I just became very aware very quickly. I'm like, oh, I don't I just don't see the world in the same way. And I think it came back to that. It's just what I was surrounded by. Also, I was the youngest sibling of like my eldest brother is 12 years older than me. My eldest sister's 11 years older than me. And so I was surrounded by like sort of teenager going into adults people as well. And that changed my perspective and changed the way I saw things and experienced things. So I think it was a combination of all of those factors.
Did you realize at that point that your parents are immigrants? Did that feel like your first generation?
No, and that is the biggest surprise I've had in the last 2 years. Like my father passed away in 2017, and what usually happens when a family member passes away, especially an older family member, is you start to look at all of their history and the artifacts from their life. And that's when it kind of clicked in my head the last 2 years. I was like, oh, like I'm like the son of immigrants. Like my parents were immigrants. I'd never even occurred to me my whole life. Even when you see on the news or in the media people having conversations about immigrants, and I was like, oh, my parents are that. And that's when it really sort of crystallized for me as I was looking back at my father's life and then asking my mom questions about hers. That's when it started to make sense to me.
Was it challenging to get along because your parents are from two different countries to start with, and then I moved to Canada? What was that like as you guys grew up? Because you became a communication person. That's why I'm asking this.
yeah. And I'll be the first to say too, it is likely a trauma response of some kind. It's like that's why I became a communications person. But yeah, there's no denying like it only now looking back on certain incidents. Like my father was a coach, for instance. He started to coach hockey and coach soccer, myself and my brother in particular. And he was an incredible coach, wonderful, like one of the best coaches I ever had. And now looking back on certain events, I realized that one of the reasons why, this moment happened where somebody would make a joke about something was because he had a foreign accent. And the even if it was a Swiss accent and he was, the big, tall, strapping Swiss man, it didn't matter. That stuff would happen, right? And for my mother, same thing, right? She's this Portuguese woman who's blunt and very strong and does not accept anything less than the absolute authentic message of what's coming from a person, right? Like that pushes people away. It also invites people in, depending on the kind of person, right? And so, yeah, there was lots of miscommunication that would result in, we'll say heated debates, and that's something I was very much aware of throughout my life. My mom and I got into big debates as well, that ventured into angry fighting territory, and that's what it was. It's trying to find ways to communicate authentically and have that be received authentically so that we can actually come to some kind of understanding. And I was not very successful at that to begin with. I'll say that.
That's what I was going to ask you. What did you learn from the experience of having two sets of parents that are from different backgrounds, and then you're growing up in Canada, which again is a completely different background, and your communication? What did you learn from that you took forward into what you're doing today?
I can say it as simply as this: is the conversation or the argument or the disagreement is never about what it's about. It's about something deeper. That's what I learned. And for me, that's when it comes to anything, writing, trying to help somebody find their voice. If I'm ghostwriting, when it comes to coaching and culture in particular, it's when you see a reaction to something that is bigger than the moment. It's not the moment, right? It means that there's something else going on. So that's what I've definitely taken into what I do now. Is I help a person not to say what they're trying to say what they're really trying to say, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense, actually,
Yeah.
especially in the communication field. Miguel, you're so good at words. You're a poet, you're a writer, and you mentioned that you're also a ghostwriter, which makes you understand things in a deeper format. What took you down the path of doing the writing, the poetry, and then going down the career that you chose?
So creativity has always been important to me. I was, drama kid, and all forms of writing. Like writing, reading a book was the first thing that woke me up to a real world that existed outside of the confines of my own experience. And I was like, man, if a book can do that, like, imagine what a human being can do if they can harness that particular technology of communication. And so poetry, it's funny. It was actually fiction was the thing that I really wanted to dabble in. And then when I was 19 years old, 20 years old, I was like, I'm going to write a book and I'm going to become famous, like super arrogant, because completely ridiculous. And my brush with that experience, I got a little bit of attention on the book. It wasn't a good book, I'm going to be honest, but I got a bit of attention on the book. And then the work that I would have had to do to bring it up to a specific space, it was a negative experience for me, and I ran from fiction and I hid in poetry. And it's because poetry is a lot more open to interpretation. That's what it is, right? So you can like kind of hide your ego in that space. But then I kind of started to love poetry, and realizing that working in the poetic space allows you to find really meaningful ways to say things in the more tangible nonfiction or even fiction space. And my underlying obsession with science, coupled with that, made me just obsessed with helping scientists tell their story properly, right? Because if you help somebody communicate, you go straight for a scientist, or you go straight for, a leader in an organization, you help them say like, yes, that's what I meant. I never could have got there on my own. It helps everybody else enter their particular sphere of intelligence, their sphere of mastery, and kind of understand not just what they've done, but why they're doing what they're doing. And so that's what it was. Like, it's taking the way to turn a phrase in poetry or on a stage and being able to apply that, especially to help scientists communicate, has been a real big driver for my career. That's why I went in that space.
What's the obsession with science? And I wouldn't use those words, but I'm using your word. What is the depth for scientists and for you really desiring to give them a voice to put their stories out so people understand them? What is that?
So consummate scientist was my father, as I say. My father, who'd had a couple of experiences in his life where he saw things that anybody else would describe as like, oh, that's a spirit, or that's a ghost, or that's whatever. And I remember asking him, I was like, so do you believe in ghosts? He's like, no. And I was like, well, then what do you think that was? He was like, whatever it is, we just haven't thought about it yet. We haven't considered it yet, right? And that always fascinated me. And then also watching what science can achieve. Like, I remember sitting there with my father watching like certain documentaries when I was a kid. And I remember being excited about something and him going downstairs, going to the encyclopedia, grabbing the A encyclopedia, bringing it upstairs, putting it down in front of me, opening it to Atlantis and saying, now read that, right? And just because of like the wonder that could exist in the historical and potentially scientific space, I was like gobsmacked. And so the more I learned about science, and in particular now astrophysics and cosmology is very, very interesting to me. The more I learned that it's actually not an endeavor to try and prove yourself right. It's actually an endeavor to try and prove yourself wrong. It's like, I have this theory, let's see if it holds up. And so you're like working to try and prove yourself wrong. And the more we do that, the closer we get to not just I'm not going to say fundamental truth because that makes it finite. It's the more we get to the infinite, actually, right? Like I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson say, and I'm sure he's quoting somebody else. The more our sphere of knowledge grows, so too does the perimeter of our ignorance, right? And that is wondrous for me. Like the fact that we can just keep going and keep learning and keep expanding and keep going and keep learning is amazing. But coming back to the science communication side, is I know some extraordinary scientists who have discovered some extraordinary things and can do extraordinary things for all of humanity. But if we can't understand it, at best, we ignore it. At worst, we fight it. We literally go against it. And like I think about even something as simple as the branding around climate change, right? Like we have misbranded climate change. It's not like we're not trying to save the planet. The planet is going to be fine. It's just whether or not we can live on it, right? It's like we need to instead. It was I think Adam Frank says he's like we need to bring the world a proposal and hope it accepts it. You know what I mean? It's like here's what we're going to do. Please let us stay here, right? Like it's that kind of thing. If we can communicate the real fringes of science and frontiers of science and what everybody is trying to do in those laboratories to improve our lives, to help us both in the medical sense and in the climate change sense, all of that is just so integral and necessary. And more importantly, it is a source of hope. It is a source of optimism. So
I am so super intrigued with what you just said about the depth of learning things and understanding that the more you learn, I'm going to rephrase it, the more you understand that you don't know enough, even though we're close. Would you take me through the process, Miguel, of how do you work with these scientists? Because that's all about communication, because they know their field, yet you're attempting to translate it into a language that others can understand. Could you take me through a process of how do you work with someone to pull those things out? Because communication is communication no matter where you go.
Yeah, so it's really it's a fun process actually. It can be wildly frustrating for the scientists, but it's the process is it's be okay with being stupid and with being ignorant, right? And so I'll be like, okay, can you go deeper and explain it to me again? Is there a metaphor you can use until eventually I can explain it? If you can get me to the point where I can explain it, then now we know we're onto something. Now we know how to communicate. But the problem is for a scientist is there's like, imagine somebody who's had a 20-year career and they've just made this excellent progression, or they've just invented this excellent thing, whatever it's going to be. And they're telling you, the punchline of it, but they're telling you that through this filter of 20 years of experience, this 20 years of exploration and experimentation and learning and failing and falling on your face, all of that. And so to them, this is the story that ends here, when in fact, the story that matters to all of us, and don't get me wrong, this is amazing and worthwhile stuff, but the story that matters to the rest of us is right here. It's right at the end, right? It's like that beautiful punchline, right? How can we synthesize all of this that gets you to here in a way that, most importantly, is human? How do we take it out of that? I think there's a misapprehension that there's a separation between, like, there's the scientist and then there's the rest of us, right? And it's how do we get them out of the lab coat? How do we remind ourselves that they're just humans? And the reason why they're exploring out here is to improve our lives, is to improve our understanding. And hopefully that understanding can lead to some kind of, betterment for our future, right? The reason why it's frustrating is because you have to take them through these layers and layers of, like, no, we did this experiment to get to this, to get to this, to get to this. It's like, just like, tell me again what you found and what possible applications there are for it, right? And then again, and then again. And what's really cool is eventually you get them to a place where they stop talking about the science and they start talking about the thing that drove them to science, or this particular science. And what's really cool is it always begins with a personal story. And that story connected to this discovery is the best tool for communication ever.
I absolutely love that, because I have been in spaces where I'm in front of someone and they're talking about whatever it is that they're working on. And I stood there going, I have no clue what they're saying. They could be talking a completely different language right now. And
Yeah.
to have them simplify it. So thank you for taking the process of how do you get them to simplify it so that people can understand it that having spent 20 years in a lab or in a business or whatever, getting to that conclusion. So thank you for simplifying that for me. And also, how do you begin the process of culture and communication as you work with different companies? For me, because I get to do a podcast and I get to speak with so many wonderful individuals from so many different backgrounds across the world, it takes me being very mindful and very emotionally intelligent to be present here, to hear that person out and be in the space that they're attempting to communicate to me and to the rest of the audience. So for you, because you work with cultures and communication, which they're connected, but they're two different things at the same time, how do you go through that? And if you could give some nuggets for people that have companies, people that have different businesses, how do you start so that people are hearing you and understand you?
The way I start is this is going to sound bad, but I kind of scare them to begin with, and this is what I mean. Is communication isn't just one thing. It isn't just like the email blast, the social media post, whatever. Every single decision an organization makes is a piece of communication, whether they want it to be or not. And so, and this is why that should scare people. It's because, in a good way, this is why it should compel them to do culture on purpose. So if I, for instance, am at say we're at like a mid-sized company, 20 people or whatever in it, and we are in a rough situation financially, right? Like we've just gone through the COVID thing. And so what we're going to have to do now is either lay off people or maybe cut. Actually, we'll even go bigger organization. But either we're going to have to do mass layoffs, or we're going to have to garnish wages, whatever it is we're going to do, right? In a typical communication moment, right? Nobody consults their value stack that they have. Nobody consults their vision or mission statement. They're just like, oh, okay, let's get HR to send an anonymous email, and then we're going to delete their emails from the systems, and that's it, right? To tell people that they have to go, or that they're going to bring that stuff down. So we've all seen that. It's a terrible practice. It actually doesn't help business. I know that there's a lot of people who believe it does, but it doesn't. It just makes the numbers work temporarily. But what have you just communicated now to the people who stay, right? What you just communicated is, for the sake of numbers, Simon Sinek talks about this, for the sake of arbitrary numbers, we would rather sacrifice the people who could save us in this space. Right? And so everybody who stays there now knows that there's no safety, loyalty, or reciprocal anything, right? So you've just communicated to them that they are less important to you than everything else that you are doing, right? You've just destroyed your culture, right? And versus in that same situation, and I had a wonderful leader who did this once. So he went to a conference. At this conference, was going to decide the financial future of the organization I worked at. Right, it was going to decide, will there be the same amount of money next year for this particular organization, whatever it was. And it didn't go well, and he came back. And there's this long hallway that we used to be in. Like each of our offices was all the way up the hallway to the end where his office was. And he stopped in at every single employee, including the person who worked the front desk. And he was like, hey, just came back from the conference. It didn't go well. Like, he's being very open. It's like, it didn't go well. And what I would like is for everybody to join me in my office in about 15 minutes, okay? And I said, what I want to do is I want to brainstorm from everybody's perspective what we can do. And he literally knocked on every door, knocked on mine, knocked on my friends. He just went all the way down. We showed up in his office at the end of it. And he was open and honest and telegraphing to us. He's like, I trust your expertise. I trust the connectivity we have here and collaboration we have here to come up with potential solutions and potential new sources of funding for this organization that means a lot to us, right? In other words, he went to the culture, to the people, to save this rather than cutting the people to save arbitrary numbers, right? And of course, that organization is still going very, very strong, has completely survived because of his example. He was vulnerable, he was open, he was honest. And that decision let all of us know how trusted and valued we were. And more importantly, it solidified a culture that you couldn't poach us. Like there wasn't any one of us who was going to go anywhere. The only, and to the point where he actually helped me find another job because he's like, you've reached the ceiling here. There's nothing else that we can do literally because of the corporate structure. So I'm going to help you find another thing, right? Like that's the difference between understanding how important communication is and how important every single action you take needs to be aligned with what you claim to be your values. This is why values can't remain static on the wall. And so that's how I get people to understand, like, oh, I really need to pay attention about how we communicate and in what ways we communicate, because it will define the culture you have. It could ruin it in a heartbeat, and it could solidify it in a heartbeat.
So many nuggets in there. I'm grateful for you. When you walk into companies, because I'm always looking for ways for people to understand that the value of anything in this world are the human beings that are in this world.
Yeah.
That the human family is the most important part, and that's why we develop anything, is for the human family to grow. So when you come across companies, how many of them really understand their cultures and their communication pattern?
This is going to be a somewhat depressing answer. How many of them? Not enough is the truth. There's still, I'd say the majority, maybe not so vast a majority as it once was, but the majority still operate as, like, if you ever hear anybody answer the question, you know, or say to you, the reason we got into business is to make money. That's one of the silliest, emptiest things I've ever heard in my entire life. Because if the goal is just to get money, then what? Right? It's the whole, like, it's like the goal of having a car is to get gas. I can't remember who said that, something, right? It's like, no, it's like to go somewhere. Where are you going? And so, but there is a lot of amazing voices in the space and people in the space that are making the system tip. A lot of people who understand, like, actually, no, your customer's not your priority. Your people are. Like, your culture is your priority, right? Like Philip Drucker, yeah. I think he famously says, you know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's true. It doesn't matter how good your strategy is. It'll go down on impact with a bad culture anytime, right? In the same way that no strategy can be so successful with a good culture. So there's a lot that are still stuck in that old modality, not realizing that every single constituent, whether it's, you know, like clients to contractor to creator to board director, they're all people. Like they don't seem to get that. But the ones that do are, like, they're not just winning, they are winning in the very best of ways. They're creating, again, these cultures you can't poach people from. They're creating cultures that are really resilient, truly resilient. It's really quite extraordinary when you see what some of these organizations can do with, they become more than the sum of their parts. And again, like all the metrics we love, you know, like money and stuff going up, they go up too. But what matters is these people come home, like, fulfilled. These people are less stressed, less burnt out. After a crappy day, they'll be excited to go back. You know what I mean? Because they want to hang out with those people again. Like, that's the thing. It's once you show people tangible examples of that, and where it has worked, then they start to see what's going on. But the truth is, I have found sometimes you just can't convince a person who's just really locked in that old idea of looking at, like, oh, it's nothing personal, it's just business. I'm like, how can it not be personal when your business is made of people? Like, just leave your humanity at the door. It doesn't work.
What is the most challenging thing about building good communication within a company, from what you've seen so far?
There's two major barriers I've seen. So the first one is self-protection. So if you are in if you're in an organization where there's a lack of psychological safety, as you say, emotional intelligence, the at least some portion of your energy is going to editing yourself before you speak. It's going to not sharing as much as you would want to share. It's going to sometimes even hoarding information or leads or whatever it is, right? So the biggest barrier there is vulnerability, and people are not ready to do that in a place where they don't feel safe. The other barrier, and I'm going to call out leadership here. The other barrier is the top-down leadership model, right? So if you have a top-down leadership model and you think that's the way it should work, you're already out to lunch on communication, because you're never communicating directly with your staff when it comes to big events, right, or big moments. You sometimes you might knock on their office door and be like, "Hey, what's up?" And then you'll go to your office, and then you'll go about your day, and you'll forget about any interaction you had. But if you're not the one to deliver good or bad news, then you shouldn't be the one to deliver good news either. If you're not the one to admit a mistake, then you're not the one to call out a mistake either, right? It's that kind of stuff, right? So that's that top-down leadership, which gives you the idea that you have to know everything and be everything, really shuts down communication, because again, every organization takes on the affects of its leaders, right? So if they're closed off, then the rest of us are going to be closed off too. We don't know why we're doing it. We just respond, right? That's it. And then of course there's actually one other one, but it's sort of a symptom of these others, and that's we say our values are this, but on a day-to-day basis we do this instead, right? That dissonance, people can't live in that. People they will never trust you. You can't form a culture based on values that aren't exercised. So
I know that today's best word that I hear from everybody is authenticity. And I struggle with that one, especially when it comes to businesses and corporations, because we kind of said it. Everything that is communicated out is portraying what the company's about, what the image is about, whether it's an email, whether it's a social media post. How do we work to make humans more authentic, yet still have good communication? And where I'm going with this, Miguel, is I've seen people where take authenticity to the extreme of, I'm going to share everything. Okay, that's authentic. But how do we tune that in so that the corporation is authentic, the company is authentic, the human is authentic, yet you can still understand that this is a business? Am I kind of clear in how am I asking this?
Yeah, I think I understand. I have sort of two answers to that, right? So, I think a lot of people, you're right, people bandy the word authenticity around without necessarily having a set definition for what it is. And so if it's saying and doing what you actually believe, like for instance, I'm going to share everything, right? To me, that actually isn't really authentic. Like, yes, it's sharing your story and that sort of thing, right? But it feels like a reflex or almost a self-protective response, right? I'm just going to share everything. That's all I'm going to do, right? Rather than being like, oh, I'm looking for connection. And so in the business sphere where you can be authentic all the way up, it's really, really hard to do because it's messy and it comes at the cost of self-interest. Like, you can't be egotistical in that space, right? You can't, you have to embody it in every single thing that you do, right? Which is like, no, we believe this. It means making decisions that are going to go against our best interests sometimes because it's part of our values. But it also means, and this is the most important one, is changing the way you hire people. So if you don't hire a skill set, I hate when people do that, because a skill set is only as good as the person who wields it. So you need to instead hire for values first, values alignment, right? Like, it's sort of the same thing with if you're dating, if you have a conflict of values, that's something that is almost irreconcilable, right? Like that's an intrinsic part of me disagrees with an intrinsic part of you, right? So the conflict of values in a organizational space, that comes from not being clear about what your values are when you're hiring. And it also comes with not unpacking with that person in the hiring process, that, like, what do you actually believe and what do you actually care about, right? Like, I don't want to say you value, exploration and experimentation, right? I don't want to hire you for a job that is strictly for proficiency. Like, if you're just being proficient in your work, then I can't hire you for that, right? Like, because that's not going to let you exercise your best strengths. That's not going to let you grow. That's not going to let you be happy at work. You know what I mean? Instead, I'm like, no, I want you in the R&D space for like, where we've set aside budget in the communication space, for instance, to try a new podcast for the organization, to try doing a video series with a new organization, right? And you're like, okay, cool, I can go do that. Now I know that I'm using your skill set and your values at the same time. Problem is you have to be so clear with your own values as an organization, and a lot of people struggle with that, right? So it's just exercising from the beginning. What are our values as an organization? How do those values show up in day-to-day behaviors? Like, that's the biggest key, is how can you make it reflex? And when anybody, I don't know if you've ever done martial arts, right? But the first time you step into martial arts, you do what any normal human does when somebody throws a fist at you. You go like this, right? You're like, oh my God, right? It takes training and practice before you step in and you block and you understand that you can control situation, right? It's that. It's how do you make values reflex? And then how do you make sure you're hiring for values first? Skill set still matters, but how are you still making sure you're hiring for values first? That is how you can start to build authenticity all the way up and down. And then the only other thing I will say is, what are you incentivizing, right? So if you're incentivizing result, don't do that. Incentivize the behavior that gets the result, right? So incentivize, I think that's Simon Sinek too. Incentivize the values-based behaviors, right? Like, celebrate the values-based behaviors. When somebody stands up and says, I screwed up, and this is how I screwed up, like, reward that person, right? They had the guts and the courage to step forward and actually demonstrate that. Demonstrating learning, demonstrating vulnerability, all of that. You reward that, everybody else is going to be like, yeah, you know what? I need help. Or, you know what? I want to connect on this project over here, right? They'll have the strength to speak up.
What's the toughest thing you've seen walking into an organization or a company or entrepreneurship that you go, I got to deal with this. They're inviting me for this, but I really need to deal with this. What's the most challenging thing that you've experienced?
The most difficult job in the world right now is middle management. And when you get called into an organization by a senior leadership group and they're like, we want to fix our culture, and you have to start here with the middle managers, something, right? It already tells me that they don't know where culture comes from, right? Because culture doesn't come from middle management. Culture comes from leadership, right? It's, again, they set the tone. Everybody else is an expression of that culture. And so the hardest thing is, first of all, I feel for middle managers, because the most middle managers I know, they're stuck in this really difficult, compressed space where they want to do leadership differently. They want to do it more authentically. They want to communicate more authentically. They understand that work isn't what it used to be. It's a different animal now. But that's working down this way, and then working above them is a group of people who don't want to hear that. They just want to see results, right? And so this is why we're getting like record burnout at the middle management level. I mean, everybody's getting it, but at middle management level, hardest job in the world. And so if somebody comes in and like, we need to fix our culture, fix the way we communicate with our culture, whatever it is, and you need to start with these people, I'm like, oof, like that's like destined to fail immediately. And that is the hardest thing for me. Like, when I watch middle managers who so desperately want to be that leader that they wish they had, they're taking these courses and getting these wonderful skills and all of that stuff. And then they're like, hey, great, I've got this new stuff. And I'm going to come back and we'll work with my team on that. And then they sit in the chair and they have no choice. They have to start reacting again to the culture that they're in, and they don't have time to deploy the new skills. They don't have time to practice the new skills. They're still too busy reacting and reacting and reacting. So I think that's the hardest thing I've seen for me is a misapprehension of where culture comes from, and these wonderful, well-meaning middle managers who are trying to gain more skills that they just don't have the time or opportunity to deploy to lead in a different way.
How do you even begin to turn that around, honestly, Miguel? Because that's the challenge with a lot of individuals is the gap in where they think the challenge is when it really is in a completely different space. How do you even begin that process?
So the leaders who are open to it, you have to ask them like, okay, are you willing to listen? And when they say, what do you mean listen? I listen to my employees all the time. I mean, like, no, actually listen, right? So are you willing to go to the lowest employee in the organization, ask them what's wrong, and trust that their opinion of what's wrong is actually correct, right? And because they live in a very different world than you do, right? Like if you're up in this office over here, it's, are you sitting there willing to listen, really, really listen? And then you listen to the next group of employees and the next group of employees, and the next group of employees. Like if you have a facility that is a shipping facility, all right, and you spend all your time in the office, you don't know anything about their job, right? And you don't know anything about what's wrong with their job. And every single bit of information you've got about what's going wrong there has been filtered through multiple people. So are you willing to go down, sit with them, listen to them, actually hear what they say is wrong, right? And write it all down. And I've heard so many CEOs say like, oh, they're just complaining because the work is too hard, right? I was like, no, it's this idea that this isn't a resilient group of, this isn't a resilient generation is nonsense. Productivity is up 67% in the last 30 years, all right? So don't tell me it's not that. People are working multiple jobs because we can't afford to live right now, right? It has nothing to do with resiliency, right? It's instead, these resilient people are trying to tell you about problems that they feel powerless to fix. So are you willing to listen to them, right? And I tell you, the organizations that do that, they turn it around. They really do. They turn the whole thing around. There's an incredible example of that is Bob Chapman. He's Barry Waymiller in the United States. He literally like buys defunct, their company buys defunct factories, goes in, talks to the people, and just changes all the things that they say is wrong. And then it works amazingly, and everybody loves to work for Barry Waymiller, right? So it's that. It's do you have the willingness to listen? And if you don't, if you think that a complaint means somebody is weak, then you shouldn't even be sitting in that chair right now. Right? Like if somebody has the courage to come to you to say like, hey, I think this is wrong in the organization, or this is a problem over here, that courage should be rewarded. And it tells you they care. It tells you they care about their job. They care about everything that they're doing, right? So have the guts to be wrong, have the guts to be flawed, and listen and take it all in. And yeah, it might suck, it might hurt, right? But on the other side of it, at least you'll know what to fix.
Absolutely love that. The listening skill, which is so badly needed in our world, because it's wonderful to get to interact with so many individuals. I'd like to take it to a level outside the corporations, which let's give some nuggets to individuals that are out there networking or building their businesses. How can they be authentic and really communicate well as they step out instead of handing business cards, which rarely accomplish much for people? How do we get people to begin to communicate better so that they understand each other and really begin to build businesses and build relationships?
I know my approach to that, and I know what I would tell people to try. I'm going to say it's not for everybody, but to my way of thinking, it's this: any business that you're building or any individual effort you're trying to make in the world should already be coming from a place of authenticity. And if it is coming from a place of authenticity, if it's something that lights you up, gets you super excited, give it away for free. That's my answer. Is like, say if there's an organization you super care about, and like, okay, for me, from a communication standpoint, right, there's an organization I think is doing extraordinary things out in the world, and I think they have opportunities to go even further with their storytelling and their communications. I'll just send them an email and be like, hey, I think you guys should try this, this, and this thing, right? And I'd be happy to weigh in if you need it. If not, go for it. Like literally give it away for free, right? Give your thinking away for free. Give even your products away for free. Like if you look at some of those really incredible people, one person I want to shout out right now actually is, her name is Stephanie Harrison. She is the author of a book that just came out called New Happy. Highly recommend to everybody. But if you look at the way she has built her community, she started giving it away for free. She had a newsletter that she was emailing out to 17 people at a time, and just slowly over time, as she did her research about what behavioral science and neuroscience has to say about what happiness actually is and where it comes from, she started just to give all that stuff away for free, right? And now if she's not yet, she's a best-selling author. She released the book a couple of weeks ago, something, right? And she very much deserves to be. It is incredible, it's practical, and it is free, and that's where it stands from, right? And the thing is, if you start giving your stuff away for free, if there's real value in it, people are going to come back to you for more. And that's when you can be like, all right, now pay me. You know what I mean? It's that, and it's also how you start to create authentic relationships, like real networking. As you say, it's not the business card in the hand, and it's not like I actually hate the idea of networking events, to be honest. Like there's that idea, it's so contrived, it's so unnatural. You know what I mean? Instead, what I like is like, okay, say you're into a specific kind of artist and you go to the gallery on that day. Anybody else who is in the gallery on that day is there because they love that specific kind of artist. You already have something in common. Start a conversation, right? Like that's real networking. That's from an authentic place. And if you're communicating authentically, you give people the choice of yes or no. Like, yes, that, I'm vibing with that, or no, not that. That's not what I'm into. And that's good. If they want to work with you, great. If they don't want to work with you, great. Because it wouldn't have worked in the first place if you're presenting yourself authentically. So my approach is give it away for free. I've been called a bad capitalist for that, and that's fine. But I truly believe it. Give it away for free, and you'll see what starts coming your way. The opportunities that start coming your way.
Miguel, your concept is incredible, honestly, of giving it away. And I've heard that concept also from Evan Carmichael, who also advises if you have great input for a corporation or something, send it to them. Let them know what they're lacking, what they need to be aware of. And that always comes back in folds. And even if it doesn't, you just did something so incredible for the individuals that are in that company. You've just impacted so many people way beyond what you can think of. So I love that concept. And I don't believe that there's not enough. There's always more than enough.
Mm-hmm. That's the other thing. I'll give you a really wonderful example of this. I'm going to shout her out too. She's one of my favorite people on this planet. Her name is Theodora Jean. She owns and operates a company called Coldwater Communications, which is in PR media space. It's values-driven PR. She only works with organizations that are doing good in the world. And here's why I want to call her out. When COVID hit, she had just started this organization at the side of her desk, and she didn't have a way to like bring in any other work. Like basically business dried up overnight. So what she started to do is do the work for free for organizations that she cared about. And sure enough, as that happened, those organizations that loved the work that she was producing, they would then reach out to other organizations who were partners and be like, hey, you should work with this organization. And in the course of 5 years, she grew it from a company of one to a company of, I think, 4 or 5 full-time employees and 20 contractors across Canada. You know what I mean? Like that's what I mean. Give it away for free and people will talk about you. It's the best marketing you could possibly put out into the world. So.
And it wasn't a strategy. It was simply her being authentic and caring about these individuals to give them some information that they could definitely use. So that's beautiful. Miguel, I'd like to know, how do you take a lot of the communication stuff into your personal life? Having spoken about 2 different cultures in your family, growing up that way, growing up in Canada, now that you're an adult and you teach this and you work with the organizations with it, how does that impact you personally in your personal life, if you don't mind?
No, that's a great question. I learned pretty recently that my the listening that I deploy, in when I'm listening to a client, or when actually when I'm listening to my spouse or something, right? I don't deploy as well when it comes to my kids. And so learning to be actually present in the listening space, not listening to respond, but listening instead to take in the information. It makes you far more attuned to all of the stuff that's not being said but communicated. I don't know what the numbers are. I think somebody said it's like 90% of communication is nonverbal, right? It's in body language and circumstance. But yeah, it's that is I don't like any of the stuff, the broken stuff that was handed to me, by accident, by parents who were doing the best that they possibly could. I want that box to be a little bit lighter when I hand it to my kids, right? And I know it won't be perfect. That's fine. Like Gabor Mate talks about that. He's like, just heal a little bit, you'll be okay. And for me, the big thing is communication. It's that. It's the most tangible example I can give is about it was about 8 or 9 years ago when I realized that none of my family members, we never say I love you to each other. Like we know we love each other. Of course we do, right? Like there's no dispute on that. Like we get it. But we never said it, never said it out loud. And so I was like, well, that right there, like I'll start saying it. And there's no obligation for anybody else to say it back, right? If it makes you uncomfortable, right? But I'll just start doing that. Because that's what's the real story beneath every single petty dispute, ridiculous squabble or misunderstanding. The real truth behind all of that is I love you. Like, you know what I mean? Especially when it comes to your family, right? The real truth beneath everything is we're all the same people. Just we look a little different here and there. That's it, right? And so yeah, that's for me. I just want to consistently and constantly get better at communication, because on a daily basis, I'm still going to screw it up 5 or 6 times, right? And especially for like my kids, I want them to know that I love them, right? And I want my actions to back that up, and I want my words to back that up, and I want them to feel as if they are loved, right? So that's where I take this technology.
Oh, please elaborate a little more on that, especially for parents, especially for busy executives and busy people that are out there with their kids. How did you communicate so that they can hear you and you can hear them?
Walks are magic. That's my answer. Go on a walk, and like schedule it. Schedule a walk with your kid, right? And shut up. Like schedule a walk with your kid and shut up. Like you can ask them like one question, like what brought you joy today, right? What sucked today, whatever it is, right? Just do that, but then shut up. And they will talk for as long as that walk lasts and longer still. And you will learn so much more about them, about their friends, about what they love and what they hate. Like you'll learn it all. It's so walks are a big one. But the other thing is, I mean, you've heard this 1,000 times from 1,000 different people, is work is done when work is done, right? And it will be there. It'll be there in the morning. Close your damn laptop, switch off the phone, like be present. And when it comes to those heightened moments where, like the kid's like, oh, but I don't want to, or you guys are getting into an argument or something like that, remember that this is not happening to you, right? This is not like a kid coming at you or anything like that. And again, too, I'm not perfect. I could still rise to those occasions, but just remember that what is really happening right now is as simple as a misunderstanding. That's always it. And seek out understanding as best you possibly can. But yeah, walks are magic. Oh my God, walks are magic. You want to learn about your kid or anybody, like ask them one question, walk through the woods, and shut up. That's it.
I vouch for that too, because I've taken many walks with my nieces and nephews, and the amount of wonderful communication that can occur is incredible because they feel safe and they feel heard in those moments. I know that I train a lot on mindfulness and emotional intelligence, and I catch myself, which is the wonderful thing about knowing something. I catch myself a lot of times like, that wasn't very mindful. That wasn't very emotionally intelligent. So thank you for saying that you still even work on your communication skills.
Oh, yeah.
Just because you're out there training it, it doesn't mean we know it all.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Consistency is like being consistent in your learning gets you off the hook for when you screw up. You know what I mean? Because at least like 95% of the time you're doing your best, right? And so those moments where you screw up, you can be like, all right, I am not a screw up. I just made a mistake. That's all.
Do you have input for individuals that are having a challenging time communicating with someone, that the other individual is completely like shut off or is not willing to share?
Mm. Um, the Okay, so there's interesting data on this. Usually, the answer to that is like some people will say like, "Oh, that's just that person. They're very taciturn. They keep to themselves." Right. Most often, it's one of two things though. It's either A, they're unpracticed at sharing what they really want to say, or B, something about the moment, the relationship means that they don't feel safe. Right. And it's just trying to, in some way, shape, or form, instill that safety, right? So psychological safety is a big deal, and I'm by no means an expert in this space. I've seen some incredible people do incredible work in the psychological safety space, and I could refer anybody to them. But it's like any way you can remind somebody, and it doesn't have to be verbal. Just remind somebody that like anything is okay. Anything they share, anything that they don't want to share, even them talking to you about like, here's why I don't want to share this, because it connects to this, it connects to this, it connects to this. You're gonna be like, thank you for sharing that. Like, thank you for letting me in and understanding that a little bit more. And if there ever comes a day where you feel ready to share that, I'm here too, right? Like, it's all good. There's literally nothing bad, right? It's I think, Rima, you and I talked about this a little bit, is the entire human disaster is in us, right? So like we have all the good stuff, we have all the bad stuff, right? Which means it's all okay because we're all human, right? So if you can make somebody feel safe, like that's the biggest thing. And then when it comes to the practice thing, that's how can you give them practice, and how can you show them the value in sharing that stuff that they keep under the hat. It's not an easy thing to do, and I don't have any really like easy answers for that.
Thank you. At least you've given them a nugget to open up and at least let someone know that they're willing to listen no matter what. Yeah. Miguel, let me go back to telling stories. How does someone begin to tell their story, especially entrepreneurs, not only corporations, but individuals? You spoke about scientists. What's a good way for someone to begin to tell their story? Because you say story is the most important part of what someone is hearing. I've heard you say that to me in private. So
yeah. So what Rima is referring to is my belief that the most important technology that we've invented as a species is story, the ability to communicate, and to begin to tell your story. Here's why it's beautiful to do it, and this is why I would encourage people to do that. To begin to tell your story is to begin to understand it, right? And the plenty of wonderful writers who are far better than me will tell you that art, and in particular writing and storytelling, is actually not an act of self-expression. It's an act of self-discovery, right? So when you write about what you're thinking that day, you're literally discovering more about yourself, right? When you set up characters in a setting and a plot and you start to write that story, what's coming out of you is what you're thinking that day and how you imagine a character would act in this situation versus this, and all of that, right? It's all, what are you thinking? What's eating at you, right? And you'll start to see themes appear, right? So that's why when it comes to, if I could entice anybody to start telling their story, you're going to learn so much more about yourself, whether you mean to or not. And the other thing I'm going to say is this, and we talked a little bit about this too, is the reason why you need to tell your story and to start to, even if you just write it in a journal, like this is why journaling is so important, is because there is no other story like yours. There will never be another story like yours. There has never been a story like yours. That's it. Like it doesn't matter how, if you're like, oh, but people go through worse things than I do. Doesn't matter. My life is boring. Doesn't matter, right? It's tell the truth about what you've gone through so that you can learn from it, so that others can learn from it. And I promise everybody, whether it's a business or whether it's a personal story, there is somebody out there waiting to hear yours. Like, that's the truth. Somebody out there is going to hear it and they're going to be like, oh, I feel seen. I feel understood. This happens to other people too. I'm not a crazy person. You know what I mean? Like, that's the reason why. It is literally, I think it was Kevin Smith who said it, like, your story is your currency in this world. Right? So like, that's why, like, if I could entice anybody to do it, do that. And on the other side of it, like, start with the journal, start with the really hard one you can do is take, from the first 10 years of your life, whatever your memories are, take your very best moment where you felt like absolutely in full career of what it means to be you. And then take your absolute worst moment where you could describe to another person as if you were watching a movie, right? And write them both down. And here's the cool thing about that is at the end of it, thematically, you're going to see it's the same story. It's just the flip side to like the good is the flip side of the bad is the flip side to the good. It'll tell you something about yourself. So yeah, tell your story.
You have written 2 plays.
Yes.
What prompted you to write plays?
Really extraordinary connections, actually. Thankfully, I've been surrounded by theater people my whole life. And I have this extraordinary friend in the UK. Her name is Elizabeth McMullen, or Liz. She was going through a difficult time where she was struggling in her relationship, in her marriage. And so she had an idea for a character, and she's like, I know, Miguel, you and your spouse are writers. Would you be willing? Right. And so we sat down actually on this couch over here, all of us, and we broke the story. And I was like, screw it. I'll write the first play I've ever, actually that would be the second play. When I think about it, I'll write the play. And she, from there, did all the hard work. She was the one who found a producer. She got it up in London. She got it up in full run at Edinburgh and all that. It was all her work. All we did was put words on paper. And then the other one was sort of the same thing here in Vancouver. Another friend named Liz, who she wanted to see a play. She was experiencing issues of trusting. And what I mean by that is trusting in this world. In a world where so many bad things can happen, how do I trust the choice to bring kids into it and that sort of thing? And she said, you got anything in that space? Would you want to write a play? And I said, sure. And same thing, I sat down with, again, my partner, broke the story and wrote that. And that was really cool for me because it's a really dark exploration of, imagine a world that has debilitated any opportunity for trust. Like, there's no connection between human beings. And then 2 people forced into a situation in which trust can arise again. What does that look like? So that was the premise of that. And that was a fascinating experience too. So that's where that came from. I was just lucky enough to have people who wanted to tell a story and had a story to tell. So,
Miguel, before we go further, how do people connect with you? How do they reach you?
I'm in all the usual places, except Twitter. I won't go there. But you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram and Medium, and of course my website. And on Instagram and Medium, you'll find me under Eichelbard. So EICHELBARD, and same thing on Medium as well. So yeah, find me in all the places. Reach out.
And for individuals that are looking to grow and become writers themselves and tell their stories, what would you suggest to them? Where would they begin?
Ooh. Okay. There's 3 books you're going to read. You're going to read, I've got one right here. You're going to read Words Are My Matter by Ursula K. Le Guin. You're going to read On Writing by Stephen King, and you're going to read The Artist's Journey by Stephen Pressfield. And then you're just going to do. This is an art of doing. You just keep doing, and you keep doing, and you keep doing. When it comes to writing, contrary to what people believe, it's not in the first draft. The writing comes in the crafting and the editing afterwards. where different versions of you on different days are going to be arguing with each other about what the best way to say a thing is. That's where you find your authentic voice, and that's how you can write characters that are much smarter than you. That's how you can do it. It's just like the 20 versions of you that edit a piece will agree and come out to something at the end. You're like, yes, now it says what I wanted to say. So it's just practice, 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 get it wrong, and understand that everybody's first draft is garbage. Like everybody's. Stephen King does it in On Writing. He'll show you his first draft and then he'll show you how he edited it. All right, and he does it too. That's my point. We all screw up on the first run out. So that's my advice: is do, and learn from and read. Obviously, read everything. Read. So
great advice. What is the most challenging thing about what you do in communication?
Ooh. The most challenging thing is to get, it sort of depends. If you're communicating for yourself, the most challenging thing is to really, really find what it is you're trying to say. Most of what we first sit down to write or communicate is a stack of cliches and stuff that we've consumed over the course of, the last 10, 5, 20 years, whatever it's going to be. So it's getting through all of that to where you start to get to the bedrock. The most challenging thing about helping other people communicate is if they don't feel goosebumps, then you're not doing it right? And to get them to that place is to keep asking why until they actually kind of hate you a little bit. like keep asking why, and you'll see that you can go deeper and you can go deeper and you can go deeper until they finally get to the bedrock moment. And sometimes you'll find when you get to that bedrock, people start to cry, people start to laugh, people start to get angry uncontrollably. They don't understand why, right? But that's the hardest part, is taking people on that walk, because it's a very long and it's a very difficult walk.
What's the most rewarding thing about what you're doing?
The most rewarding thing is the discovery that there is no darkness. There is those empty spaces that we as just communicators and artists or whatever, that we are terrified of when it comes to a blank page or whatever, that nothing's going to come, that ideas are finite. It's the discovery that everything is infinite. Something always comes. And not only does it always come, it is always going to surprise you. And it is one of the most beautiful things ever. Like when you find the way to communicate an idea so that it lands and then you see it land. Or when you take somebody on that long walk and you say the phrase that lights them up, and then they come to you a couple of weeks later and it's tattooed on their arm. Like it's that kind of thing. Like that's the money stuff right there. Like there is no darkness. But human creativity is infinite, and so is our ability to communicate and connect. That's the most rewarding discovery on the other side of that.
Miguel, if I put you right now in front of a group of young individuals, I'm going to say early 20s, that are working on discovering themselves even further, creating a path for themselves, building their careers, and they're in a space where they're not completely sure of themselves and where they're heading, but they think they are.
Mm.
What would you say to them?
Make sure it's your voice you're listening to. And sometimes the voices in our minds telling us where to go or where not to go are not our voices. You can usually tell the difference because the negative voices are not yours. It's the real voice that's yours is going to be the one that kind of flares up and says, "Oh, that's interesting." Anything that comes after that in the negative can shut up. Like that's it. It's make sure you are listening to your real voice, the stuff that lights you up. And finally, if you don't have it figured out, nobody does. Nobody does. Experiment. Go try all of the things. Try anything that lights you up. Go try it. Get some gold from it, whether it goes well or not, and then come back. And the more you do that, the more complete you become. You become this wonderful collection of skills and experiences that, again, is unlike any other. So that's it. Just make sure you're listening to your voice.
I absolutely love what you just said to them, and especially about nobody has it completely figured out. I don't care what we know. We just don't know we know. We're always in the changing mode. Miguel, before I ask my final question, is there anything that you like to say that I didn't ask you, that you go, oh, Rima didn't ask this? Is there anything that you like to say?
No, not even a little bit. There is one thing I would like to say, though, is that you, Rima, are extraordinary. And I've only known you now for, I mean, like the cosmic equivalent of 10 minutes. And it is such a pleasure to know you, such a pleasure to chat with you. And the energy that you're bringing to the world is a necessary energy. And it only amplifies the more people you talk to.
Thank you. I accept that completely. Miguel, what would you like to see happen in the world because we're communicating better, because we're being more authentic? Is there a vision within you that you go, we can get to those spaces? Gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. This is a big one, but I do indeed. We have organized our world and the way we communicate about our world under a false assumption. The false assumption that I think it's called veneer theory. The false assumption is that this idea that we're nice and connected to each other is this thin veneer over this boiling pot of like rancor and anger and greed and selfishness. As it turns out, none of that is true. The real truth, to quote Rutger Bregman, is that the vast majority of us are actually pretty decent. Like we're pretty decent human beings. And what I want is if we start communicating that properly, where we stop telling everybody what we're against and we start telling people what we're for, that is a very, very different world where whenever we tell somebody what we're for, what our vision is, same thing starting a company, everybody races to help us if they agree with that vision, right? So stop this. I understand that the commercial design of media right now is for clicks and attention. And because of negativity bias, that's where we go. We go into the negative space. But I promise you right now, the world is not nearly as bad as you think. And people are not nearly as bad as you think, despite all of the negative stuff that's going on in the world. And it's communication's job, it's storytellers' job to make people aware of that. So that's what it is I can't wait for the political campaign that is, this is what I'm for. And I'm literally going to ignore what I'm against. I'm going to tell you, like, this is where we're going. We're going to do what works here, and we're going to do what works here, and we're going to do what works here, and we're going to bring it and adapt it to our country. Bang, that's it, right? That's, to me, that's the end goal, is stop telling me what you're against. I don't care. Tell me what you're for.
Oh, drop the mic on that one. That was perfect. Miguel, I thoroughly appreciate you, and I always enjoy having conversations with you. And for our listeners, please remember our attitude always determines our altitude. And please reach out to Miguel. He is incredible at helping you get to the levels of better communication, authenticity in your world. We love you, and we'll see you in the next podcast. Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you.